I'm going to tell this the way it happened to me, because even now it still feels ridiculous to say out loud. It was one of those things that sounds made up when you hear it from somebody else, and I get why. But every part of it was real to me, and I still can't explain most of it. This happened in late October a few years ago, when I was driving back from western North Carolina to my apartment outside Nashville. I had been helping my cousin move furniture into a storage unit in Asheville, and I took a couple days off work because I figured I might as well make the drive back slow and stop somewhere overnight instead of trying to do 6 hours straight after lifting boxes all day. I was alone, driving my old silver Toyota Camry, the one with a dented rear bumper and a dashboard that lit up like a Christmas tree if it rained too hard. I had the windows cracked because the heater in that car always smelled like burning dust. It was already dark by the time I crossed into Tennessee, and I remember thinking I should just get a room somewhere near Johnson City and finish the drive in the morning. I should mention something else because it matters later. I had my phone on a charging cable, a cheap GPS mount stuck to the windshield, and a half-empty bottle of Coke in the cup holder. I was tired enough to be stupid, but not so tired that I couldn't tell I was in one of those parts of the country where the highways thin out and the towns look like they were built for a different century. The kind of place where you pass a gas station, then a church, then 10 minutes of trees, then another gas station with one flickering sign and a dead mailbox out front. I took an exit I hadn't planned on taking, because I saw a motel sign glowing red off to the right. It was one of those older places with the office attached to the front and all the rooms laid out in a square around a little parking lot. The sign said vacancy, and the A kept cutting out. There was a diner next door that looked closed except for the kitchen light. I went inside the motel office, and the woman behind the desk looked like she'd been there since the 1980s. Not in a cute vintage way. In a tired, closed-off way, like she'd seen enough people to stop being interested in any of them. She asked for my license and credit card without smiling. Her name tag said Loretta. She slid the room key across the counter and told me, "Don't leave valuables in the car." I laughed a little, because that sounded dramatic for a place with 6 cars in the lot and a vending machine buzzing by the ice machine. She didn't laugh back. She just looked at me for a second too long and said, "I mean it." That should have been enough to make me leave, honestly, but I was tired and hungry, and the room was only $69. I took the key and went to room 12. The room was plain in a depressing way. One bed, one nightstand, a chair, a TV with a remote wrapped in a plastic sleeve, and a bathroom with a shower curtain printed with blue waves. The air smelled like old cigarettes, even though it was supposed to be non-smoking. I remember tossing my bag on the bed, taking off my boots, and opening the curtains because I needed some sense of outside. That was when I saw the woods behind the motel. Not a nice tree-line, just a thick black edge of trees beyond the back parking strip, with a chain-link fence partly hidden in the dark. I was in there maybe 10 minutes when I heard a knock. 3 quick knocks. Not the loud kind from someone trying to get your attention, just firm enough to make you answer. I opened the door, expecting maybe the front desk woman had forgotten something. Instead, there was a guy standing there in a faded orange work shirt and jeans, maybe late 30s, early 40s. He had a brown beard, a baseball cap, and one of those faces that looks normal until you notice the eyes. He held up a pack of cigarettes like he was asking to borrow a lighter. "Sorry," he said. "You got a light?" I told him I didn't smoke. He nodded and looked past me into the room, not subtly. Not at the TV, not at my bag, but toward the bathroom. "Room 12, he asked. "Yeah." He nodded again like that meant something. Then he said, "You see anybody go through the lot tonight, you call the front desk. Don't just walk out." I stared at him for a second. "Why?" He shifted his jaw and glanced over his shoulder. "Just saying." Then he walked off toward the back side of the motel. I stood there a few seconds, not sure what to do with that, and then I locked the door. 5 minutes later I heard the ice machine outside, then a car door slam, then nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid and turned on the TV. Nothing good was on, just local news and infomercials. I ordered a burger from the diner next door by walking over, because I figured I'd be safer in the open than sitting in a weird room thinking too hard. The diner was half empty. There were 2 truckers at the counter, an older couple in a booth, and a teenage waitress who kept looking toward the parking lot every time the bell over the door rang. When I paid, I asked her if the motel was always this strange. She stopped wiping the counter and looked at me like I'd said something dumb. "You staying there?" she asked. "Yeah, just one night." She lowered her voice. "Don't go behind the rooms." I said, "Why does everybody keep saying stuff like that?" She looked over her shoulder at the cook, then leaned in and said, "A woman went missing there in March." I didn't say anything. "She was in room 9, she went on. Motel manager said she checked out early. Sheriff said she wasn't exactly the kind of person who got missed right away." "What does that mean?" She gave me a look like I was missing the point on purpose. "It means people here assume the worst and keep driving." I took the burger back to my room, and by then I was actually irritated. Not scared, just annoyed and hungry. I ate sitting on the bed while some crime show played on TV, and I remember thinking the whole town had probably turned a missing woman into a ghost story, because people in small places get bored and dramatic. I was about to shower when I heard a sound outside my room. Not a knock. A scrape. Like something metallic being dragged over concrete. I turned the TV down and listened. Another scrape, then footsteps, then a low voice speaking too softly to make out. I moved to the curtain and looked through a crack. There was a man in the parking lot near the back fence, crouched beside a dark sedan with no lights on. Another person was standing by the trunk. It looked wrong immediately, because their movements were quick and secretive, and one of them kept glancing toward the motel office like they were worried about being seen. I called the front desk, and nobody answered. So I did the thing I still regret. I opened the door and stepped outside just enough to see better. That was when I noticed the trunk was open, and there was a shape inside it. Not a body, not exactly, but a bundled thing wrapped in a heavy blanket. The standing man turned and saw me. He didn't yell. He just froze for a second, and then slammed the trunk shut. I backed into my room so fast I almost fell. The footsteps outside started moving toward me. Then they stopped. Then somebody knocked once, very slowly. I didn't answer. The voice on the other side said, "Wrong room." I wish I could explain how chilling that was. Not because of the words, but because of the calmness. Like a person correcting a mistake, not threatening you. The knob rattled. Once. Twice. Then I heard Loretta from the front office shouting something across the lot. I couldn't make out the words, but it broke the silence enough for the person at my door to leave. I looked through the peephole and saw a truck pull into the lot, followed by a sheriff's SUV with blue lights on but no siren. A deputy got out and walked fast toward the back fence. I stood there a while, heart pounding, until someone banged on my door and told me to come out with my hands visible. It was a deputy in his 50s with a heavy mustache and a flashlight that blinded me when he pointed it in my face. He asked if I'd seen anything. I told him what I'd seen in the parking lot, but when I described the trunk, he looked at me like he wanted me to stop talking. The deputy's name was Harlan. I found that out later. He took my statement in the office while Loretta sat behind the desk with her hands folded like she was in church. The younger deputy had already gone around the back, and from what I could piece together, they'd found a sedan abandoned near the fence. The trunk was open. There was blood in the trunk liner and a pair of women's shoes on the ground nearby. Not the body, just the shoes. Nobody told me that directly. I heard it from Loretta, who said it only after the deputies were outside. Was it the woman from March? I asked. She shook her head once. Could be related. That's not an answer. She looked exhausted all the way through. This place sits by the interstate. People use it when they don't want to be seen. That night they closed the motel office and told everyone to stay in their rooms until they said otherwise. I did not sleep. I kept hearing cars in and out of the lot, deputies talking on radios, and at least once, maybe around 2 a.m., I heard someone crying near the fence behind the rooms. Soft at first, then cut off suddenly like a hand had covered a mouth. By morning, the lot was full of county vehicles, and there were white evidence markers near the back fence. I saw them loading a rolled-up carpet into the back of a truck. The diner next door was closed, and the teenage waitress was standing outside smoking with her arms wrapped around herself. I asked her if she knew what happened, and she said, "They found her purse in the woods." "Who?" "The missing woman." That was all she said before she started crying. I tried to leave, but the deputy at the office wanted me to wait because they still had questions. They asked about the men I saw, their truck, the woman's shoes, whether I'd heard any names. I hadn't. I only remembered the orange work shirt and the baseball cap. They showed me photos later, and I didn't recognize anybody. Except one. One of the photos was of the man who'd knocked on my door asking for a lighter. His name was Calvin Reese. He had a prior arrest for assault in Georgia, and he'd been linked to a string of disappearances along interstate motels over the past several years. That was the first time I heard the phrase, interstate predator, from somebody who wasn't saying it to scare people on the internet. Harlan told me Reese had been coming through the region with another man, using cheap motels, rental cars, and storage units to move stolen property, and apparently people. He didn't say exactly what they'd found, and I didn't ask. I was scared enough by then to be polite. The missing woman from March never turned up, at least not that I ever heard. The papers ran a small story about a body found in another county, but the details were vague and the names were never fully released. The motel shut down a few months later after an inspection and a lawsuit. Loretta vanished from town before anybody could ask her anything useful. The diner was torn down the next year. I drove home that afternoon with the windows up and the radio off, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had almost opened my door to the wrong person on the wrong night in the wrong room. It was the kind of thing that only has to go slightly differently for everything to become a headline. What gets me most is not even the trunk or the blood or the missing woman. It is how ordinary it all looked. A tired motel on the edge of an interstate. A woman behind a desk. A burger from a diner. A man asking for a lighter. That is what real danger feels like, I think. Not like a movie. Just like a place you would never think to fear until after you've already been standing there in it. And every time I pass a motel now, especially at night, I still think about that slow knock on room 12 and the voice on the other side saying, "Wrong room." It started with a noise at the back door around 11:40 at night. I lived in a single-story house in a quiet subdivision outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy. Beige siding, short driveway, one dead tree in the front yard, and a neighbor across the street who always kept his porch light on. That night I was home alone because my wife was working a double shift at the hospital and my son was staying with his aunt. At first I thought somebody had bumped the trash cans outside. Then I heard it again. 3 knocks. Not loud. Careful. Like whoever was standing there did not want the whole street to know. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing at first, just the weak yellow light from the porch. Then a shape moved. A man in dark clothes was standing close to the door, too close. He had his hood up and his face angled down. He did not ring the bell. He just waited. I did not open the door. I asked who it was, and the man said, "Open up." His voice was low and flat, like he had said those words many times before. I stepped back and called 911. The operator asked if the person had a weapon. I said I did not know. She told me to lock every door, turn off the lights, and stay on the line. I could hear my own breathing through the phone. The man outside knocked again, harder this time. Then I heard footsteps moving off the porch. For a second I thought he had left. Then I heard something worse. He was not alone. There was another voice, somewhere near the side yard. A woman, maybe. I could not tell. Then came the sound of something dragging against the fence, slow and metallic. The dispatcher kept asking me questions, but I was staring at the kitchen window, afraid to move. 10 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up. 2 officers got out, both calm, both carrying flashlights. One was a tall man with gray at his temples. The other was a younger woman with her hair pulled back tight under her cap. They introduced themselves and asked me to describe the man at the door. I told them exactly what I saw. Hooded sweatshirt, dark pants, no visible car. They walked the property first. Front, side, then around back. I remember the older officer telling me, "Stay inside." Door locked. The younger one asked if anyone else lived there. I said no. She looked around my living room like she was checking for someone hiding in plain sight. Then both officers went around the side of the house together. And that was the last time I saw them. At first I assumed they were still outside, searching the yard or talking to someone near the back fence. But after a few minutes, the front yard went quiet. Too quiet. The patrol cars were still there, doors open, lights flashing red and blue across the windows, but no footsteps, no radio chatter, nothing. I called out once from the doorway. No answer. I called again, louder. Still nothing. I was about to step out when the police radio sitting in the older officer's car crackled. A burst of static. Then a voice, faint and broken, saying something I could not make out. The radio went dead. I called 911 again immediately. I told the dispatcher the officers were gone. She thought I was confused and asked me to repeat myself. I said they went around the side of the house and never came back. I could hear her typing fast. Then she asked me a question I will never forget. "Sir, are you alone in the house right now?" I said yes. She told me to stay on the line and not let anyone inside. That was when I saw the second patrol car's spotlight was still pointed at my backyard. It was moving slowly, like someone was inside the vehicle. Then the light shut off. Both cars were empty. No officers in sight. I got the sudden, awful feeling that I was not supposed to look out there. But I did anyway. Through the kitchen window I could see the side yard, and near the fence there was something on the ground. One of the officers' flashlights. Still on. Pointed straight at the grass. Then a door opened somewhere behind my house. Not mine. A low metal creak, like the gate to the backyard had been opened from the other side. I backed away from the window so fast I nearly fell. The dispatcher was telling me to move to the safest room in the house, but I could barely hear her. I locked myself in the laundry room and waited there with the phone pressed to my ear. For the next 15 minutes, I heard nothing except the dispatcher breathing and asking me to respond. Then all at once, there was pounding at the front door. Not one knock. Not a code. Just heavy fists hitting the wood over and over. A voice shouted, "Police! Open up!" It sounded exactly like the older officer. But the dispatcher on the phone was still talking to me, whispering now, telling me not to open anything, telling me that neither of the officers had answered their radios in over 10 minutes. The pounding stopped. Then from the hallway outside the laundry room, I heard another sound. A slow, wet cough. Right outside the door. I do not know how long I stayed frozen there. I only know that when backup finally arrived, they found both patrol cars empty, both officers missing, and the back gate standing wide open. No blood. No bodies. No sign of a struggle strong enough to explain how two trained cops could vanish in a matter of minutes. The only thing they found inside my house was the older officer's flashlight, sitting on the kitchen table like someone had placed it there on purpose. The case never made the news in any real detail. The police told me the officers had probably followed a suspect into the woods behind the subdivision. But that was not true, not the way I remember it. They never left my property. I watched them go around the side of my house, and I never saw them again. To this day, I still think about the voice at the front door saying, "Police, open up," after the officers had already disappeared, because whoever said that was not supposed to know I was alone. I used to deliver food for a pizza chain outside Columbia, South Carolina. One night, I got an order for a man named Jim. The address was on a quiet road surrounded by woods. When I arrived, there was a small white house with a porch light on. I walked up and knocked. After a few seconds, a man's voice from behind the door said, "Leave it there." I confirmed the name. "Jim," he replied. I left the order and drove away. About 20 minutes later, the store called. The manager sounded confused. "The customer says you never delivered the food." I told him I had just dropped it off. He asked me to go back. So I did. But when I reached the same road, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The house was gone. Not abandoned. Not dark. Gone. The spot where it had been was now an empty field covered in tall grass. No driveway. No porch. No mailbox. Nothing. I checked the address 3 times. My GPS insisted I was standing at the correct location. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jim. I answered. His voice was calm. "You came back." I asked, "Where's the house?" There was a long silence. Then he said, "It wasn't supposed to be here." The call disconnected. The next day I searched the address online. County records showed a house had once stood there, but it had burned down nearly 15 years earlier. The owner's name was James Jim Carter. I quit that job a week later. Maybe there was a logical explanation, but I know what I saw. The first time I went there, there was a house. The second time, there wasn't.